Hello and welcome to episode 35 of the Music Behind the Magic podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Goodman, and as always, I'm here to celebrate with you the magic of Disney songs, scores, and soundtracks from the movies to the parks. We all know that the Walt Disney Company is a huge, diverse, and complex conglomerate, offering movies to theme parks to cruise lines to streaming networks and beyond. In between all these offerings, there's also been a fascinating history of Disney video games. From the earliest handheld Game & Watch games of the 80s to the incredibly immersive 3D rendered graphics of today. And today we're joined by author and friend Shaun Jex to discuss his latest book, Dreaming in Digital, The World of Disney Video Games, and explore this history and also talk about some of his favorites. And since Shaun is also a fellow Disney music connoisseur, we dive into one of the most interesting pieces of Disney musical history, to me and Shaun anyway, the short-lived but fascinating rise and fall of Halyx, the Kiss meets Star Wars rock band that played at Disneyland space stage during the summer of 1981, and only during the summer of 1981. All this, and we have Disney music news for you as well. Before we continue, I want to take a moment, as always, to thank you all for listening. I love hearing from you through social or email, so please always feel free to reach out to me at jonathan@musicbehindthemagic.com. Follow me on Instagram at musicbehindthemagic, and check out our Facebook group for lots of fun conversations, debate, and opinions. And if you're enjoying this podcast, I would only ask that you share it with a friend, family member, or coworker. And if you think I've earned it, please leave me a good rating and review so other Disney music lovers can find it too. With that, I invite you to hearken back to the summer of 1981. Picture, if you will, a rock band whose bass player is a combination of Wookiee and Wampa, and enjoy this episode of the Music Behind the Magic podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, Halyx.
Well, we are absolutely thrilled to be joined today by Shaun Jex. Shaun is the author of the newly released book, Dreaming in Digital, The World of Disney Video Games. He's also written the book Main Street Gossip, the inside scoop on all your favorite Disney characters. A former writer for Old Schooler Gamer magazine, he also contributes to Celebration Magazine, is on the Celebration Magazine podcast, and runs Make Mine Music, a blog dedicated to the music of Disney. Shaun, it's so great to have you on. Thanks for joining.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, you and I have chatted before on the Celebrations podcast, but I had to get you for myself to talk about some Disney music.
All right.
So, what I always like to ask, especially for someone who's as steeped in Disney tradition and history as you are, tell me about your Disney origin story. How'd you fall in love with the company? How'd you become kind of a contributor and a content creator for Disney stuff?
Well, it goes way back. My first trip was when I was probably 3 or 4, going down to Disneyland, and then went down to Disneyland a few times. My first trip to Disney World, Walt Disney World, was when I was a little bit older, but my dad worked as a pilot, and it was getting near my birthday, and my family took me. They just told me that I was going to go see my dad's plane, and we went on the plane. And I apparently was young enough that I didn't notice that we were hauling a bunch of suitcases with us, because I just thought we were going down to tour it. And then the plane started taxiing out, and I was like, why are we moving? And they were like, we're going to Walt Disney World. And so I've loved the parks ever since then. Disneyland is actually where I went on my honeymoon, and I married a fellow Disney fanatic as well. So that's just kind of wove its way through my whole story. So
you started young. You started super duper young. And you have kids. Are your kids Disney fans too, or they just kind of follow you and your wife's lead?
No, they're both huge fans as well. So when we go to the parks, they're always, as soon as you get that pass through that welcome sign driving in, because we always drive, they're like, "Oh, we're home again."
Isn't that great? How long
Yeah.
of a drive from where you are?
It's 2 days, so
Yeah,
it's I want to say it's 16 hours, maybe a little longer than that.
it's a commitment, but I
Yeah,
agree. There's like once you go through those gates, it just doesn't matter. It always hits you exactly the same way. It never gets old.
yeah.
Yeah. And, I mentioned you run Make My Music, which is a Disney music blog. Talk a little bit about that. Yeah, I think we chatted a little bit more earlier about your music background, but talk about your music background and how you kind of became a Disney music lover specifically.
Yeah. Well, I started playing music back around middle school, starting out with instruments like saxophone, and then I got into playing guitar, and I was in a band, and just really became obsessed with the world of music and live music, because I don't think there's any entertainment like live music, really. And that fed to like being a record collector and things like that. Um, Obviously, as a Disney fan, there's such a wealth of music that it comes from Disney, both the films, the things that you think of, like what growing up when I did, which was the golden age, the Renaissance,
Totally.
the Disney Renaissance. You had some of the most amazing music, but then going back to the Sherman Brothers, there's so much there to love. And with the blog, I kind of wanted to use it as a jumping point where you didn't necessarily have to be a Disney fan to enjoy it, but Disney was a good gateway to talking about bigger things in the world of music because it covers so many different styles, genres that they've worked with over the years.
And as you think about Disney music, it's it's a special kind of thing because it hits people's emotions in different ways. What is it? Disney music is special to everyone. Why is it special to you?
Oh, it's a little hard to pin down exactly why. Some of it, I think, is because um, there's obviously, I guess, a nostalgia factor to some of it that it's tied to specific memories and times and places. But also, I think that so much of Disney is rooted in imagination and wonder, and the music most often is attempting to evoke that feeling to help get you into that headspace. And I think that makes it something that really lingers with you.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I always kind of look at it as it's very much a critical part of the storytelling. It tells you how to feel, it tells you when to feel, and just kind of leads you on your journey. It just totally bonds with you. And it just can't imagine. I think people say if you don't know how important music is to Disney, imagine going to Disney World and not having music on. It would just be completely sensory lost. You wouldn't know how to feel.
Yeah. And I think one of the great things, like at the Disney parks, like you mentioned, is that they weave it in so seamlessly that you almost don't know it's there, but you would if it was gone.
Yeah.
So it becomes part of the background and part of an essential part of that experience, but in a really organic way. Like it doesn't ever feel forced. It feels like a natural part of the environment as you move through the parks.
Definitely. And when you when you think about the kind of music touch points that are the most important to you, whether it be a song, a score, an attraction theme, what are some of those Disney musical memories or touch points that really mean the most to you?
There's so many, and I know that's not the main thing that we want
That's
to
right.
talk about. So, the Country Bears leaps immediately to mind because they have been a favorite for decades now, and they became something that was a constant reference point for like visits from me and my family and my kids falling in love with it to the extent that I know the show has changed now. And I haven't seen the new show, but we knew every word of the old show. And so and it was something that, was like for my wife, her father, it was his favorite show too. So you had like a multi-generational thing there where it was special to him, really special to she and I, and then special to our kids, and that kind of moved along that way.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you'd been to the new one. I have not been to the new one either. So are you curious? Are you nervous? Are you excited about it?
No, so I haven't seen it live. I've seen videos. I know there are videos out there, so I've seen it, and I think they did a great job with it. And I had heard the music. Um, the original show will always be my favorite, and this doesn't replace that. But I understand also things are going to change at Disney, and so what I've seen, I think they did a fantastic job.
Yeah, I've also have not seen it, but I have heard it, and same thing. I get what they're doing. And I think that Lou Mangello once said, "If you want to make a Disney fan absolutely nuts, change something." And I think that it's been a little bit of a binary reaction, but for the most part, very, very positive. It's just something new, something different, and something fun.
Yeah, yeah, I think so too.
So, one of the main points I wanted to have you on today to talk about is your new book. So, you are a huge video game fan. You used to write for video games. How did the book Dreaming in Digital come to be?
Well, so the joke that I tell when I'm asked about this is that the first book that I wrote, Main Street Gossip, which was all about Disney characters, was really just an excuse for me to go back and watch cartoons and then say that it was research. And then the other thing that I love is video games. So I thought, well, I can play a lot of video games and I'll call that research. And so that's kind of how I decided to do that. Really more it roots from the fact that I love retro video games. So a lot of the video games that I grew up with and even older, which is what I wrote about when I wrote for Old School Gamer magazine,
Yeah.
which is going back to like my first gaming console was a Commodore 64. So,
Of course.
and so gaming from back then, my kids are also huge video game fans, and I dedicated the book to them because this was a touch point that we had on a way that we connected. So I was able to combine Disney and video games as a personal passion. I know it's a personal passion for both of theirs, and I wanted to create something that I could then, share with them and share with everybody else because I think Disney video games are a good gateway into the world of gaming. There are a lot of people's first experiences with it, and then it becomes such an expansive world afterwards, as you go forward. But it's a really good way to get into the hobby and discover the art of gaming.
Yeah, I do love the fact, hey, I gotta do research, honey. I don't know why you give me a
Yeah.
hard time. This is for the book. I don't know what to tell you. You talk 50 video games from 1981 to today. They're more than that. How'd you narrow it down to those 50 you were going to explore?
So some of them I went with, major firsts. So things like talking about Mickey Mouse on the Game and Watch because that was the first Disney video game. And then there were some of the ones that are considered classics that were like DuckTales by Capcom isn't just considered, a great Disney video game. It's considered one of the, best video games for its system ever made. So some of them were based on their historical importance when they came out. Some of them were included just because they were kind of oddities. And then, truthfully, some of them were just ones that I enjoyed and had a personal connection to and remembered playing. So it was a little bit of all three of those things.
And did you, like, all jokes aside, from a research perspective, like the game, the handheld ones from the early days, did you have them? Have you played them previously? Were you doing it from memory? Were you able to, do you have to play every game over again to refresh your recollection for the book?
No, I want to say, because I've been asked this before, I've
Yeah.
played about 32 of the 50 games
That's
in
pretty good.
the collection. So a pretty good chunk of them. Some of them, like I talk about, it's called Onk Pixu, which was like a Tiger Electronics type game. It was actually Orlatronic, but they're one of those little cheap handhelds. You used to be able to it had one game on it. I didn't play that one because it was actually only released overseas in Europe. But some of them, like even the Game and Watch ones, I've played some of those. So like Mickey Mouse. A handful of the ones that I haven't played, it was just because I didn't have the system. So like I was never an Xbox person. So there are a couple Xbox games on there that I didn't play. But I tried to include stuff that I was hands-on familiar with because I thought it gave me a little bit more insight into it. But obviously, I couldn't do that with everything. And there are way more than 50 games. There was no way to play all of them.
As much as you want to.
Yes,
Probably
I'd
not.
love
Not.
to.
And it's not just like, hey, I like this game because this. There's some in-depth historical, information about it, how the games came to be. What was your process for gathering all this information? It's easy to say, yes, I like these games because I played them. It's a whole different thing to provide so much context and color and historical basis for it.
Yeah. So I think part of it just comes from being a writer and researcher myself, but and I'm fascinated with how the things get made and the amount of work that goes into them. And so it was really interesting to dig into how we ended up with all of these games. The work that the programmers did, that musicians did, putting together the soundtrack, the work that went between, because a lot of them were Disney working with outside companies to happen. So the sharing of materials that went back and forth, and some of the hurdles that created. And so it was fascinating to do. It could be a bit challenging at times, especially for a lot of the earlier games, because in the earlier days of video game programming, a lot of the studios kept a pretty tight lid on who did the programming work because they didn't want them to get snatched up by other companies.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you dig into a lot of those early games, finding out who actually did the work on them is a little bit challenging. But uh, I love doing that sort of research, and so the challenge almost made it a bit like a treasure hunt for me that I loved doing.
And how long did it take to compile everything? When did you start versus when I know it just came out a month or so ago?
I think it took about 2 years.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a
so
healthy amount. Yeah.
a pretty good a chunk of time.
And I'm gonna ask the question because what kind of interview would it be if I didn't? Like, top three of top three, and I'm gonna ask you even to rank it if you can. Like, yeah, if you can give me the top three Shaun Jex Disney video games in the book, in order of what just personal preference, purely subjective, how would you rank them?
Okay, it's a tricky question. I am going to say that Kingdom Hearts is probably
Mhm,
number one for me.
mhm.
Because I love, obviously, you've got all the Disney characters. You go to the different Disney worlds in it, from all the different franchises and movies. But I also really love JRPGs and the Square Enix games like Final Fantasy. And
Yeah.
so the way it married those two worlds, I thought was brilliant. And it has such a good soundtrack as well. I'd throw out there as well the DuckTales game, the Capcom game,
Yeah.
because that goes back to the era that I grew up playing, like the side-scrolling platformers. And I think it's just challenging enough that it's still really compelling, no matter how advanced of a gamer that you are. But it was a good one to introduce gamers to it as well. And then, oh, that number three, finding the last one to round out the group
Yeah.
is always tricky. I'm going to say Epic Mickey. Uh,
It's an
bec-
interesting one.
yeah, I loved the game. I love the fact that from a Disney historical standpoint, it brought Oswald back into the family fold. And I thought it did some really cool things with its sort of like shadow version of the Magic Kingdom that you went to. And you had these sequences where you like traveled through the mirrors and it took you almost into uh, old Disney animated short style, like 20s, 30s type animation. So I think those would probably be my top three, but it's a difficult call.
Yeah, and that was a Wii game, right? Epic
Yeah,
Mickey? Yeah, it was.
yeah.
Um, as I was reading through, I played several. My favorite was Castle of Illusion, and I remember getting it for the Sega Genesis. I remember playing it, and just that was kind of the heyday of retro video games, right? And we're probably of a similar vintage, but I think I got a couple of years on you. So I grew up with the SNES and the Nintendo 64 and the Genesis. But I remember Castle of Illusion was particularly good in terms of soundtrack as well as gameplay and graphics. I just remember hucking those apples all the time at people and jumping on top of things in the forest, which it was just really, really well done. I just think it was a good way to have a good side-scrolling video game with just elevated type of graphical interface. It was a really good game.
Yeah, I sort of feel the same way about like the Lion King game that came
Mm,
out. around the same time, and the Aladdin game. The only reason they don't make my list is because I know how good they are, but I was terrible at both of them, and I still am. So uh, they are, but they're good. They're better than sometimes video games that adapt existing IP, like Disney video games and stuff like that, can be a little thrown together, where they're really just done as a way to kind of cash in on the success of the movie. I think games like Lion King, Aladdin, or Castle of Illusion, they actually took those and made an art out of them. It wasn't just like a quick cash grab for the things. They wanted to make a good game when they created it.
Yeah, it's funny. I also wasn't very good at Cast of Illusion, and I'm trying to, in my head, playing back why. And side-scrolling games are. I'm not a great video game player in general, just full disclosure. But I think one of the things that made it challenging, if I'm remembering correctly, is there was something about the way Mickey moved. It wasn't just like him walking; he kind of bounced in the walk, so it made for me the timing of the jumps weird because he was kind of doing his little goofy Mickey bounce, and that, in addition to actual trying to get him to get from one branch to the other, always just kind of threw me for a loop.
And it has been that one, I think it's been a minute. So honestly, my recollection of the gameplay on that one is a little hazier.
Well, it's a good excuse. You could say to you say to your family, "Look,
Yeah.
not for nothing, I got work to do because someone talked to me about of Castle of Illusion, so I got to figure it out." And also, I'm getting old and feeble, so my memory might not be as good. I just might suck at video games in general, but I do remember the mechanics of Mickey were a little bit odd in terms of getting the
Mhm.
hang of. And those games have, if I'm not incorrect, some of them have ported to the iPad and other non-console games, right?
I believe there was a remake of
Yeah,
sorts with Castle of Illusion.
yeah.
Yeah. And then some of the other ones. So, like a chunk of I know, like on the PlayStation 4, like, and the 5, you could get the old Lion King, Aladdin games. I know they also put out like a Disney Afternoon collection that
Mm.
was like the Tailspin game, Darkwing Duck, DuckTales. So a chunk of those older ones you can still find. I did find some of the really old games, like the ones that came from Sierra, like Donald Duck's Playground and things like that. Al Lowe, the guy who did a lot of the programming for it, actually had put the code for them online for free, where he was just
Okay.
like, because the company isn't around anymore. So he was just like, if you want this game, here it is. So it's kind of cool that you can still get a hold of those, especially things like that are a little harder to come by.
And you kind of mentioned some bits and pieces of things that you find compelling about them. But as you think about it, what do you think makes and specifically a Disney video game great? What is it about a Disney video game that is particularly compelling? As like this is just a good, not just a good game, but a good Disney game.
Huh. That's an interesting question. I think one of the things that makes it really compelling on Disney games is when it gives you a chance to step into the world of those characters,
Mm,
and interact with them kind of in a new way. Because obviously, when you're watching them on television or in the movies, you're really a passive observer in those worlds. In the video games, you can actually go in and explore, and you control an element of it. So I think my favorite video games from Disney are ones that allow you to do that. So it's not just, this could be any character slapped into this situation and it would be the same game. It's very distinctly that character's world. I think, like I said, on Kingdom Hearts, it
yeah.
really immerses you in the world of each character as you go between the different worlds. Um, in Epic Mickey, for example, you're in this sort of shadow version of the Magic Kingdom, and so it is literally taking you inside. Like you're going through areas like it's a small world, and if you're a Disney Parks fan, you're like, I recognize this, I know this. I'm in here and I'm interacting with it in a completely new and unique way. So I think that's part of it. Is what makes it really good is when it gives you the chance to really experience and interact with that in a meaningful way, where it's not just the character slapped into any sort of generic situation.
And I think that's interesting because it's probably a bit of, and you would know better, but, probably a bit of a balance that Disney has to have versus, hey, here's Donald and Mickey. We're just gonna go around and have picnics and, have fun versus something like Kingdom Hearts, which is arguably a bit more mature and advanced and, pushing the characters beyond what people typically think about for Disney characters. Any thoughts on how Disney manages the, keeping their image and their IP versus putting out a good video game?
Yeah, I think it's tricky. I know, like, when they were making Kingdom Hearts, one of the early concepts that they were going to have was that the main character would actually would use like a chainsaw as his weapon, and Disney came in and was like, no, 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 we're not doing that, and so that's they ended up the main character uses what they call a keyblade
Mm.
that looks like a large key, and he kind of uses it like a sword because they didn't want them to have these more violent weapons, so they wanted to be able to keep that sort of adventure. Uh, and fantasy aspect to it, but still keep the cleaner Disney image. And in some of the games, I know it was a real chill, like Disney Infinity, I think, where you had a unique situation where all of the different IP were in the game. I know Disney had very strict rules on how they could interact or if they could interact at all. Um, in terms of, this character will behave this way where they can't be doing this. They can't alter this from the character. So I think it is a challenge, um, especially when they're working with outside companies as well that are trying to put these games together where they've got to balance keeping the Disney image with making a fully functional and engaging game.
Yeah, was Disney Infinity, was that the Toy Box game? I think they had, like, Marvel Infinity too, which I did
Yeah,
play.
it
So
was back during the Toys to Life craze where you take the little figures and put it on the platform and it brings them
yeah.
live in the game. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I didn't even know they had it for Disney. I had a bunch of the Marvel ones, and that was fun for about 30 days, and it's like, "All right, I spent $20 on a whole bunch of figurines, I don't have to do that anymore." But, for the Mickey thing is interesting because you're right, with Marvel people, you can get away with Hulk smashing stuff and Iron Man blowing stuff up and Spider-Man flinging webs, but how do you get any kind of conflict between Mickey and Donald and Goofy and other characters? It's I don't know how they do those coding or figure it out right from a rules perspective.
Yeah, I think it's a challenge because you want to have the action, but there are certain things that obviously you don't want to see Mickey Mouse doing or Donald
Yeah.
Duck doing or Winnie the Pooh. So just as like examples. So you want to be able to interact with those characters and have it compelling in some way while still keeping true to who they are.
So interesting. Yeah, I was just chuckling to myself because I've seen what Winnie the Pooh can do because his IP is now gone. So they've had some R-rated, fiascos with Winnie the Pooh. But I imagine once they're still under IP protection, yeah, you gotta be so careful, and
Yeah.
especially if you're working with a third party company, it's such a delicate balance you have to toe.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
And you mentioned this also just because we're talking about music. Let's talk about some soundtracks for and scores for some of these songs. You said Epic. I'm sorry. You said the Kingdom Hearts was particularly good. What other video games have particularly memorable scores in the Disney universe?
Um, so one of the ones that I really like recently is Disney Illusion Island, which
Hmm.
has only come out in the last couple of years. And David Housden was the composer for that. Um, I the soundtrack I actually think is one of the better video game soundtracks that came out that year, and it was interesting because the game really embraces some of the old school elements, like it's a side-scrolling platformer, even though it's a new game. Um, but it really embraced the old 2D style animation so that it felt like watching an old Disney cartoon. And the soundtrack reflected that as well. So I thought it was very cool what they were able to do with the music there. And you can find it to stream pretty easily. They actually just released some extra tracks from it as well. I also really like, and this is because just the era of games that I grew up playing, I like going back to those sort of like 8-bit, 16, 32-bit games and the soundtracks that they have. So that original DuckTales soundtrack by Hiroshige Tonomura
Yeah.
is is an absolute classic. And you've got like the moon theme is the one that I think is best remembered from that. He created that for the level while you're on the moon, and it's become wildly popular since. They later, when they made the reboot of the DuckTales cartoon, even incorporated his music from that into the newer cartoon. So I think when you're talking about great soundtracks, I think that's another one. I mentioned I think the DuckTales game isn't just considered a good Disney game, it's considered a classic game of its era. The soundtrack is the same. It's not just like a good Disney video game soundtrack. It's a classic of the era. So
Yeah, it's interesting. This could be a whole separate topic of discussion. I'm sure it has been, but the evolution of soundtracks in video games has been remarkable over the years. Like you said, the classic 8-bit Casio keyboard type sounding things, which still sound great, to now you have these lush orchestral, truly cinematic, full orchestra type of soundtracks. It's such an interesting, dichotomy of what it used to be, and both work in certain ways. But you're right. Sometimes you want the big, huge orchestral thing. Sometimes you just want some 8-bit fun to play the game also, but it changes the way you play the game.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I think anyone who grew up with, say, the NES, the music for Super Mario Bros. Is ingrained in their brain. But then you have songs now that are uh, have won Grammys, and like it's hard to imagine that from the original world of Disney video games. But they're Grammy-winning video game songs that are fully orchestral with choirs and everything performing them, and um, there are touring groups like Video Games Live that put on like full rock shows built around Disney or not just Disney, but video game soundtracks. So it's definitely crazy to compare where it was to where it is now.
Yeah, and I know Zelda has different iterations of soundtracks, and everyone listens to that. And even my daughter's high school marching band is doing a whole video game thing, and there are certain things they can do and they can't do because you can march to some, but you can't march to others. And it's just very interesting to see how it works. But yeah, it is a vastly different universe. But it's so interesting.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. Any other soundtracks stick out for you? Or those are the two main ones that sitting close to your heart?
Those are probably the two big ones. I mean, there are some that I think stick out to me just because they're kind of peculiar but memorable. So, like Disney Speedstorm was kind of Disney's real recent attempt to kind of jump in on like the Mario Kart type games, and that one's really interesting because they took all of the classic Disney hits from the movies and put them all through techno remixes. So it's very sort of, I think it's a lot of fun, but it's a little jarring with some of them to hear them put through that electronic filter. Where it's, yeah, I don't know if you've ever pictured Mickey Mouse at a rave before, but that's what you're getting.
I can't say I have, and now I probably can't unsee it, but I'm sure I'm sure it's a visual.
So it's fascinating, and actually, I do talk about the process they went through for creating that in the book as well, because it was pretty interesting how they took the songs and broke them into different pieces and then remixed them and redid them and tried to come up with something new. But that one stands out just because I think it's so peculiar.
And it's sometimes peculiar is different. It's memorable, like you said. It's just a
Yeah.
different way of looking at things, and same thing that music does in the parks and the movies. It changes the way you experience the video games as well. Can you play a video game without music? Why would you want to? It would be completely hollow, right?
Yeah, well, especially now. I mean, some of those early games, obviously, you got maybe like a beep here and a beep there, and
Yeah.
the game wasn't really long enough for it to matter that it didn't have a real involved soundtrack. But um, it's hard to picture one without it now, unless it was being done for effect, like to raise tension. The silence would seem jarring.
And I'm just wondering, even back to the Game and Watch games, were they just beeps, or did they have any of that kind of Casio music in the background? I don't even remember.
No, that is was pretty much just the beeps and things like that. So And even some of the early games that were like on, uh, like the Great Mouse Detective game, which was
Yeah.
kind of like you had a little bit of music that was at the very beginning, but once you got into the gameplay, there wasn't really anything. There was just a beeps here and there. You might have a little bit of music like at the opening screen. Um, so the real early stuff, yeah, is kind of musicless, and
Mm.
it's a little bit different, but
And as look at the book, 1981 to today, 50 video games, any insight as to what the future of video games, anything what's on the horizon that you're particularly excited about from a Disney game perspective?
well, one of the things that I am super excited about, and they've done it a few times recently, is that Disney isn't making games themselves anymore. So their whole in-house
Gone.
work on that is
Yeah.
gone.
Mm.
But with some of the things that they've done, like on Disney Illusion Island, which I believe was Lala Studios, and Tron Identity was another one of them, they actually went to indie developers to get those made. So some of the smaller companies out there, and I think that the indie devs in the gaming community are making some of the most interesting games right now, outside of the like major studios, which I think is where everybody tends to look. But those smaller studios, I think, are doing some of the most interesting work. And Disney has said they're very interested in working with some of those smaller studios. Um, so I think that's a cool opportunity because I think there's a lot more outside the box thinking on some of those smaller studios where sometimes they're able to do more with less.
Mm.
And I think Disney embracing that and promoting those studios as well is just a great opportunity to kind of share the wealth, so to speak, and get them some more exposure. So I am excited for that.
Has there been any announcements as to specific games coming out?
Uh, there is, and actually, I think it just came out. There is another after Tron Identity. There is another
Mm.
Tron game that I think just dropped like in the last couple weeks,
I
and I
wonder if it's
think
gonna
it
tie
might
into
be.
Ares probably, right?
Actually, I think it's standalone.
Oh.
And I think it's Bethel Studios, which again is an indie developer, so just a real small creator.
I can imagine. Look, I don't know if you did this again because I've got a couple of years on you. I remember playing the actual original arcade Tron game in the arcade. Did you play?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I love the original Tron arcade game.
I mean, talk about sucking at a video game. I couldn't figure out what the hell I was doing, and like it was awesome to watch, but I lost so many quarters because I couldn't do
Yeah,
anything with it. Yeah.
yeah, and that's still the case. I've played it at some retro arcades fairly recently, and I'm still not good at it. In fact, a lot of those Tron games, some of the Intellivision ones, like Tron Deadly Discs, I think is a lot of fun, but I'm still terrible at it. So
Yeah. Well, I now I'm curious to see what just a pure curiosity compare that to some of the whatever Lord knows the kind of current iteration of what the Tron games are like. It's probably just like watching a high def movie in your TV screen right now.
yeah, so Tron Identity is well before this one that just came out is it's a different sort of game. It's more of a what they call like a visual novel.
Mhm.
So it's not like real-time action. You're interviewing characters and things like that, and your choices, you know, impact what happens. So how you interact with the characters changes the story. But the graphics are very much like cinematic. And it is pretty crazy to compare that to those early Tron games, although I love what they were able to do with what they had at the time too. So
I mean, anything back then, from that to the original Star Wars games, all those were, for what they had at the time, amazing.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, right. Great. So we have another Disney music topic to talk about as well. But
Yes.
again, just want to make sure that buy Dreaming in Digital. It's on Amazon. That's the main place people can buy it, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Everyone who's a fan of video games, Disney video games, it's a great read for those who love that kind of stuff. Super nostalgic, lots of insight. Cannot recommend it highly enough. So great job on the book, Sean.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay. So on to something quirky but fun. So for just to give some context, uh, on Celebrations Disney podcast we were both on, I think it was episode 140, we talked about building our own retro Disney park and what would be included in it. And you brought up a short-lived but legendary Disneyland act. It was called Halyx. And you're like, no one's heard of it. I'm like, I have heard of it, but you kind of had all the color and context. So please, let's set the stage and kind of bring people back to the summer of 1981. Tell us a little bit about Halyx.
So Halyx was uh, a pretty unique act in Disney history. They were, when you read the description, if you look them up, they describe them as like Star Wars meets Kiss. And Disney Records was looking to put together a band. This was shortly after they had had really huge success with like Mickey Mouse Disco, which is its own whole conversation. But they got this idea to put together, Star Wars was really big at the time, so they kind of wanted to cash in on some of the interest of that. And they wanted to put together a live act that would have some of those theatrics of Kiss, but with the Star Wars feel. And uh, Bambi Moe, who I believe you've talked to
Yep,
before,
she was a
had
guest on the show for sure. Yeah.
commented that they also wanted something that would appeal to what they viewed as like an underserved teenage audience that could get fans going for that. Um, and yeah, they landed on this idea of a rock band that would, when you look at pictures of the band, it's almost a little surreal. You've got like a 7-foot Wookiee looking character who's got white hair and a little amphibian guy in what looks like a Jedi cloak and
Yeah.
a robot keyboard player. And they would perform on the space stage right next to Space Mountain.
In Disneyland, right? It was
Yeah, at Disneyland, they would put on shows, so they were a live music act.
and there's a documentary which people should watch because it's illuminating. I think it's like an hour and 15 minutes because there's been some interest about this band and a lot of I found a couple interesting things as well. But yeah, the Wookiee type thing is almost like if a Yeti and a Wampa and a Wookiee all kind of crossbred,
Yeah,
it would be that. And I think if I'm trying to look at my notes here, the bass player called it it didn't have an actual name, but he called it the Baja North, I think is what he called it. The Baja
yeah,
North
Baharna.
is what
Yeah.
but what I found fascinating is there's super grainy, super crappy video of the band playing. I would try to play some, but it would just sound terrible. But this dude in this ridiculous costume is literally still playing the bass. He's playing the bass live in this preposterous, costume, and you gotta watch it. He rocks out so hard. The guy I think they're all really good musicians. That was the whole point. But this guy flies around the stage, shredding on the bass in this ridiculous getup. It's something to watch.
Yeah, he mentioned that it was like yak and ermine fur and things like that, and it was just unbelievably hot on the stage, because they're beneath the stage lights and everything, and it was summer in California, so it's gonna be a little warm. But the limited footage that exists, he and I think the whole band really just went all in on the concept, and they were going to make it, you know, not just a gimmick. They were going to be a good band, and they were going to put on a great live show for anybody that came to see them. It's kind of a bummer that there is, it was only 3 months in 1981 that they existed, and so the footage of it is very sparse. There's no real recordings of them, like a handful of recordings that you can find on YouTube. But nothing official was ever done or released, and so it's kind of sad. You got to take what you can get, but what there is that you can find is pretty fascinating.
Yeah, when I was watching the documentary, one thing there's a gazillion things to pick apart about this because it's such a fascinating part of Disney history. But apparently, one of the people on the team at Disneyland Records was Mike Post. And if Mike Post's name sounds familiar, it's because he wrote the theme songs to The Greatest American Hero, Magnum P.I., L.A. Law and Order, NYPD Blue, The Rockford Files, and the A-Team. And he's kind of one of the musical producing guys that's kind of behind this whole thing. So there's legit musical talent trying to formulate this band. And it's just fascinating how it all came about to be.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the things that made it as good as it was, is they brought in someone with legit music chops to work on it, and then put out that call to working musicians to come out and respond and try out. And everybody in the band, like, one of the things that you get in the documentary, and when you do hear the limited recordings that there are, is that they were legitimately good. They had they had all the talent to make it. They even got signed to a record deal, and were really hoping to make it big. It just happened that changes at the studio led to it falling through, and it never happened. But I think listening to, like, the lead singer, Laura Mumford,
Yeah.
had like a Pat Benatar-like voice. Like, I think
100%.
yeah,
100%.
she had all of the stage charisma and all of the vocal talent to really take it, I think, to the next level. And it was just one of those roll of the dice things in showbiz that it didn't end up happening.
Yeah, and from what I've seen or heard, like, she was a legit star, and she was a relatively unknown, right? They just kinda elevated her, and they're like, "This is the person we're gonna hitch our star to," because she was amazing.
Yeah, she was from North Carolina. She didn't really the rest of them had the rest of the band had a little more experience, jumping from gig to gig. She was really brand new, although the keyboardist, Tom Miller, was her husband.
That's
So
right.
he had a little more experience in it as well. But she was the first person that they auditioned for the band. I think they said they looked at a couple hundred people, but she was the one that jumped out at them right away from that first time that she came in. And I think it was a mix of the talent, and they said she reminded them kind of a punk rock Snow White. So she had those things going for her, where she just immediately grabbed everyone who saw her.
And from what I saw in the documentary, like, they were popular. It wasn't like some bunch of hacks they put up on stage and it was a joke. There was something to it that kinda got everyone interested in it.
Yeah, like they talk about in the documentary, they developed a core audience that would actually return to watch every single show, and started making their own, homemade merch to support the band so that they could wear t-shirts to the shows. And they came up with like a little Halyx hand signal that they would use that even the band picked up on. Um, I can't even remember what it was. Like, I think Tom Miller's character, they gave a name just by rearranging the letters in his name.
Yes, yes, I
And
remember that.
he picked up on that as well. So they developed a really devoted following. I think one of the cool things on that documentary, the Live from the Space Stage, a Halyx story, was there was actually a fan that they have on there who talked about how they blew his mind when he was 12 years old, and they're the reason that he got into music, was going and seeing them perform regularly.
It's just crazy, and it's almost like what is it, behind the music type story, right? The rise and the
Yeah.
fall. I think the goal was to, make their hay, make the good music, and then when this limited edition stage show ended, they can kinda ditch the gimmick and just move on with the music, but that never happened. If you can, talk a little bit about what happened that just didn't allow them to go forward as they wanted to.
So, um, they did their run at Disney, and as it was coming to a close, the people like Mike Post and some of the other executives wanted to kind of shop them around
Yeah.
because, they had Disney records, but they were really children's records, so they weren't going to be a fit for Halyx. So they thought, well, let's bring in other people, other studios, see if we can get them signed somewhere else. And they actually did get Warner Brothers to sign them. Warner Brothers had signed them. They were going to make a record. They went into the studio, recorded a bunch of stuff. Um, and then there were some leadership changes at the label, and the guy who had signed them and brought them in was let go. And the people that came in and replaced them weren't really into the act. They weren't the people that had brought it in. They didn't see the vision. And so they just didn't go forward with it. And they got left in this weird spot where, the deal with Warner had fallen through, but Disney didn't really need them anymore.
Yeah.
And part of, I think, the draw for some of these studios was, well, we've got this band with Disney's backing, And, Disney's name carries a lot of weight, but without Disney attached to it, there just wasn't really anything to propel them forward. So much of their stage show was also there, and they're not putting on a big stage, elaborate stage show like that without the backing of Disney. So it's just a unfortunate circumstance where, because of those changes, it just all kind of fell apart. And I think one of the most poignant things in their story is, for a lot of them, a lot of the members of the band were kind of used to the here today, gone tomorrow aspect of showbiz, and they knew, you just wait for the next gig. And that wasn't really the case with Laura. Like, when you watch that, she was always sort of waiting for them to call back and say, okay, we're ready to do this again. And it just never happened. So you have that kind of sad story of her coming so close to stardom and then just never quite making it, and it never quite coming back. Like, she recorded a few things for Disney Records later, but it just wasn't the same.
And she unfortunately passed relatively young too. So it just was a shining star that just never able to achieve its full status.
Yeah, in 2011, I believe, and that was before the documentary was released too. So I think, had she lived longer, although it's, I think, probably for people who knew and loved her, it's probably gratifying to see that Halyx is having this sort of mini resurgence because of the documentary, because there have been multiple podcast episodes dedicated to them now, and people are again making like and selling their own fan merch, and it's sort of getting this revival where this thing that had been, for a while, I think it was only if you had seen them live did you have any idea who they were, and now it's kind of starting to spread again as like this word of mouth thing, and it's cool to see it coming back.
And in this day and age, like, you never know, but I would not be surprised if there was some type of long, who knows when, if they did it just for like a special anniversary celebration or something. If something's got enough stuff brewing, Disney knows how to take advantage of it. I would love to see it happen. I don't know if it ever will, but it will be amazing.
It'd be cool if they could get the surviving members back to
Yeah.
play again. It would definitely be missing something without Laura as part of it, but it
Yeah.
would still be cool to see them do it again. I think what would be really interesting, and I don't think there's any chance of it happening, is that I really wish that somewhere someone still had those masters from when they went into the studio to record. I know a lot of times, especially back then, things just got taped over once it was used. If they didn't have the need for it, it would just get recorded over, and so they're probably gone. But I would love, for it to be sort of thing where they just come across like a treasure trove of those hidden masters of all the stuff that they actually recorded that was going to be on an album.
Yeah. And maybe I was misunderstanding, but is it true that when they moved on to record, were they going to ditch the kind of the concept and just record the music, or were they still going to move forward as the band with the Wookiee and the amphibian?
I think it was going to be a little bit different, because my
Yeah.
understanding is they signed the band and then Warner kind of came and was like, actually, we're most interested in Laura.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That really they signed the band because they wanted to get her, but I think they really viewed her as the star. And so I think they were going to have to kind of change the presentation a little bit. Um, although I think you probably could have pulled off the other when you look at the elaborate stage shows that like someone like Kiss put on, or Alice Cooper, or any of sort of that era. It's not inconceivable to see them touring with that full look, but I don't think that's the direction that they were going to go.
I think that's probably right. And another interesting thing of all the songs that were written, this one thing always made me chuckle, and I think made the songwriter chuckle. There was the songwriter named Jeannie Cunningham, and like the main song was "Jailbait."
Yeah.
And just as you think about, and we're talking about legitimate what people think of when they think of jailbait, and I don't know how that passed censors muster, but people went nuts for it.
Yeah, that's that is, especially since it was performed at Disneyland, it's a little hard to believe that it happened, especially since, like we talked about when we were talking about the video games, Disney keeps a pretty tight control on their image and what they can do. Um, I know when they talked to Jeannie Cunningham, she talked about being surprised herself that she submitted like a demo of 10 songs for them to choose from. And they came back going, we think we want to do Jailbait. She was like, really?
Really? Are you sure? You know what it means, right?
Yeah. And it obviously, for obvious reasons, it's a little shocking to modern ears. I know if you go back around that era, there's plenty of songs that have that same theme, like thinking like Motorhead and Ted Nugent and stuff like that.
Of
Where
course.
so it was all over the place at the time. Now it's very different for obvious reasons, but it was very much of that time and place. But the fact that they got away with it at Disney, now I know they weren't even sure if they could, but they went to Ron Miller at the time and said, "Hey, we're thinking of doing this song." And his approach was kind of, well, we'll be playing it live. We're not putting it out on a record. So we can probably get away with it. And if we get any complaints, we'll just pull it from the show. And so they rolled the dice, and it ended up being one of their more popular songs.
It sounded like it was one of their big ones. I think it was. I'm just looking at some of the songs there. Like there was Jailbait, there was Lightning, and What Is He Hiding, which were written by the guitarist Bruce Gowdy. Hey There Boys, which Bambi says was one of her favorites. That was kind of the big crowd pleaser. And they even did a Beatles song, Anytime at All. So there was it was a legit set list of originals and maybe a couple of covers thrown in there. But they were supposed to be pretty good.
Yeah, I actually really enjoy everything that I've heard from them, and it was a healthy blend of covers and original songs. I think it would have been fascinating to see what they could have done. I think it's also cool, much the way people are making like their own fan merch. If you go online on YouTube, there are people now who have done covers of some of the
I've,
original Halyx songs, like "Hey
I've
There
seen that.
Boys" and stuff like that. So it's cool that it's getting that second life that way as well.
And you were just talking to me before about Father's Day. You got some Halyx merch for Father's Day, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. I was surprised by like a Halyx T-shirt, and there's like a poster and a bumper sticker coming along with it as well. So you can still get out there and show your Halyx fandom.
Yeah, that Halyx poster is just such a classic 80s sci-fi, bad sci-fi movie type of looking thing. It's just delicious in how good it looks.
It's very like it should have been spray painted on the side of a van, sort of thing. So
So true. And I think I shared with you on the podcast my favorite Halyx T-shirt. It just said Halyx 1981, 1981.
yeah,
It was just my favorite one. Um, and then I think following up, there was also kind of a mini reunion of some, not all, but some of the surviving members and Jeannie Cunningham, talking about it. And the one thing I thought was interesting was the bassist. They've all, I think, done their own music because they were all such good musicians. They all continued on, I believe, as working musicians. And the one thing I thought was interesting was Roger Freeland, who's a bass player. His, maybe his second biggest claim to fame after Halyx was he was the bass player for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles theme song.
that's cool. I didn't know that
Yeah.
actually. I knew they had gone on to do a bunch of different stuff. Like Gowdy went on and played with a bunch of bands. And the percussionist, the little amphibian guy, opened like his own dance school and did things like
Yeah.
that because his role was crazy because he wasn't just playing percussion. He was an acrobat and was doing acrobatics and things like that on stage. So yeah, they all kind of went on and did their own things, continuing in showbiz. I didn't know the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles thing though. That's neat. That's a cool
It,
connection.
it's a fun little trivia thing. You can stow that and use it at cocktail parties.
I love it.
And I guess just, last question before we, kind of wrap up the discussion and let people do their own Halyx research. Why do you think there was a resurgence? What is it? Was it quirky? Was it just because it was good? Obviously, there's always, when there's a groundswell, there's something behind it. In your opinion, what caused this resurgence of interest in a 3-month long Disneyland experiment?
I think there's probably a blend of things. I think what grabs people initially, I would say, is how surreal the concept seems, especially if you hear Kiss meets Star Wars at Disney and then see the picture where it's like a blend of Star Wars characters and a guy who looks like he was pulled out of Flash Gordon, and then you know, a regular guitarist and a rock and roll woman.
Yeah.
It's a very odd thing to first look at. And I think the initial hook is you're like, well, this is just really weird. Um, I think what gets people to stay is that it was good. And I think the reason that it's having that resurgence is because it was actually good. So, you've got that hook that brings everybody in where you're like, this can't be real, can it? This is not really something that happened at Disney. And then there's the surprise that you start to dig into it and you find that there's actually a lot of depth there.
It's again, is it out of the question that some kind of Halyx thing will happen in the future? No. Is it likely? Probably not. But it's one of those things where, you start a meme, you start some things going on, and it continues to grow. If there's money to be made, it might be they might ditch Jailbait as a song if they ever do anything new, but it might be something in the future. You never know.
Yeah, yeah. I think the odds of that one being performed on a Disney stage again are probably pretty close to zero, but I would
Never.
love to see some of that come back again.
It would be fascinating. Well, listen, I am so appreciative. It's always good to chat with you, Shaun, either on the Celebrations podcast, especially now. But in addition to the book, how can people find you? How can they follow you? How can they, learn more about you and what you do?
Yeah, you can check out my webpage. This is makeminemusic.com. And there's weekly articles on Disney music, on socials like Blue Sky and Threads. I'm also Make Mine Music. So you can go there, check that out. I've got information on my books there as well.
That's great. Well, everyone should buy the book. I also read the blog every week. It's fascinating. It got a great selection of different ways to look at Disney music from all kinds of different medium and all kinds of different parts of the company. So super enjoyable, great work. And as you continue to sell the book, as other things come up, would love to have you on again. Always happy to talk about Disney music stuff with you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks, Sean. Look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thanks. Bye.
Well, thanks again to Shaun Jex for his time and the great conversation. You can please pick up Dreaming in Digital, The World of Disney Video Games, 50 video games from 1981 to today. You can buy that on Amazon. Check out his great music blog at makemymusic.com and listen to us both on the Celebrations podcast and read our articles in Celebration magazine as well. So, on to Disney music news for this week. As you heard at the top of this segment, that is music from Pixar's new movie, Elio. Pixar's Elio was just released last week, and the composer for the film is Rob Simonson, who has worked on Deadpool & Wolverine, Stranger Things, and 500 Days of Summer, Love, Simon, and It Ends With Us. This, however, Elio was his first animated film. He recently had an interview with Billboard magazine about the difference between composing live action and animation. And it was interesting that he said it was, quote, getting used to seeing hand sketches of really emotional scenes and filling in the blanks with your imagination, which actually is a process that I love. In a lot of ways, there is not the limitations of exactly what frame something needs to hit. So you're allowed to create music that has a bit more inherent music logic to it. And in some cases, they're able to get some of these things in kind of early and may have some musical moments even to hang the cut and the next animation on. So very interesting insight as to the difference between composing for animation and composing for live action, and that emotional piece, which we all know and love, is so important. So good for him for doing it. You can check out the soundtrack, which is now streaming on all your favorite musical services. I have not yet seen Elio. I've heard really good things about it. I've read very good reviews about it, even though it hasn't quite made, I don't think, the financial impact that a lot of people expected it to. And look, just being real here, it's a little bit of the Disney paradox these days. Everyone complains, oh, Toy Story 5, Frozen 12, all these IP properties there have sequels and beyond, and people want a new and fresh type of movie. Well, here it is. Everything about it says it's emotionally impactful. It's a great story. It's great characters, and just people haven't been drawn to it. I don't know if it's a marketing issue. I don't know if it's a story issue that maybe on its surface might seem a little bit derivative, but people need to give it a chance. If they want new original movies, I think this is exactly the kind of movie that people have been looking for, and I myself am going to see it. I'm curious if you have seen it as well. Please do let me know. I haven't heard too many bad things about it, so just curious as to your thoughts. So let me know and tell me what you think. And we'll talk about this in a little while, but moving on, Hercules opened on the West End, and to help commemorate the opening of Hercules the musical, the Sunday Times of London put out an article with a panel of musicians and theater critics to rank the top 25 Disney songs. As you probably know, there are few things that will create as much debate, rage, and general incivility as a music ranking, but I'm going to present this ranking to you without any comment and would love to hear your thoughts. So again, this is the top 25 songs, and I'm just going to go through all 25 of them, and I would love to see what you think, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, what is missing. So number 25, Under the Sea from Little Mermaid. Number 24, We Don't Talk About Bruno from Encanto. Number 23, Zero to Hero from Hercules. A little bit of home cooking there, but I'm sorry, no comment. Number 22, The Bare Necessities from The Jungle Book. Number 21, Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious from Mary Poppins. Number 20, Oogie Boogie Song from The Nightmare Before Christmas. Number 19, A Cover Is Not the Book from Mary Poppins Returns. Number 18, You're Welcome from Moana. Number 17, Whistle While You Work from Snow White. Number 16, Mother Knows Best from Tangled. Number 15, Colors of the Wind from Pocahontas. Number 14, Out There from The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Number 13, Surface Pressure from Encanto. Number 12, Everyone Wants to Be a Cat from The Aristocrats. Number 11, Baby Mine from Dumbo. And here we go with the top 10. Coming in number 10, Can You Feel the Love Tonight from The Lion King. Number 9, A Whole New World, Aladdin. Number 8, Beauty and the Beast. Number 7, When You Wish Upon a Star from Pinocchio. Number 6, Remember Me from Coco. Number 5, Go the Distance from Hercules. Number 4, Feed the Birds from Mary Poppins. Number 3, I Want to Be Like You from The Jungle Book. Number 2, Part of Your World from Little Mermaid. And the number 1 song, according to this Times of London expert panel, Let It Go from Frozen. So there is a lot to think about, digest, go through your head, go through it a couple of times. Would really love to hear what you guys think about how that sits with you. If there's anything that was too high, if there's anything that was too low, if there was any glaring omission, which there's got to be several. Again, there's always people like to throw things at their radio when there's not a song they should believe should be on there. So do tell me what you think. You can find this article. I'll post a link to the article on the Facebook page and on Instagram, and also put it in the show notes. But by all means, tell me what you think. Would love to hear your thoughts. And speaking of Hercules itself, it has opened on the West End to, from what I've seen, maybe somewhat kind of mixed reviews. The common consensus is that the muses are incredible. And Stephen Carlisle's portrayal of Hades is also great. But some of the criticisms were the sets are a little bit underwhelming, and the lack of Pegasus and some other characters that we kind of grew up with and know and love, like Pain and Panic, they're apparently missed. All the reviews I've said that the cast is super talented, but the show maybe just lacks a little bit of emotion. But with all that, just to give you a taste as to what everyone's raving about, and these are the muses, here's a quick little snippet of Zero to Hero to give you a taste of just how powerful these guys are. As you can tell, there's a lot to love there, but I'm probably, in all reality, not going to have a chance to see the performance or the show on the West End in that iteration. If it comes to Broadway, if it tours nationally, I will. But if you are in the UK, I know we have some listeners in the UK and in Europe. If you have seen it, if you're interested in seeing it, please let me know what you think. I would love to hear your thoughts. And in some Disney adjacent news, and you'll see what I mean, EGOT, the EGOT winner, Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, and Tony winning songwriting duo of Robert Lopez and Kristen Anderson Lopez, two-time Tony winning director Alex Timbers and Hamilton producer Jeff Seller have joined the development of the musical stage adaptation of the 1987 film The Princess Bride. That's right, The Princess Bride is coming to Broadway. Apparently, and this is why it's Disney adjacent, Disney Theatrical Productions was originally involved in this development, but it sounds like they've dropped out for some reason. According to this particular article, it doesn't really say why, but they've backed out and they've made room for Jeffrey Seller, who produced Hamilton, and brought in Robert Lopez and Kristen Anderson Lopez. And I know we spoke to them. I spoke about them a million times. They're legends. They're the kind of the leaders of the Disney revival with Frozen. Just to give you an idea of what they've done and why they've deserved it. So they have 2 Oscars from Let It Go from Frozen and Remember Me from Coco. They have 3 Daytime Emmys and a Primetime Emmy for WandaVision's Agatha All Along. They have 3 Grammys for cast albums and soundtracks of The Book of Mormon, Frozen, and Let It Go, and 3 Tonys, 1 for Avenue Q and 2 for The Book of Mormon. So I think part of the Disney revival, much like the Renaissance, is it came with a lot of Broadway sensibilities. Clearly, they have that. It's shown in how they've done Frozen, is how they've done Coco and everything else they've done. So I'm sure that this will be amazing. I wish Disney was involved. They are not. This is kind of new developments. It's been going on since I think 2019 in terms of news being developed. So still lots to come to see. But if it does come to Broadway, I am super excited to see what this particular music will be like. And in Disney Park celebration news, Hong Kong Disneyland is going to celebrate its 20th anniversary on September 12th. But on Saturday, June 28th, the celebration kind of begins early, leading up to that big 20th anniversary official party. As part of the festivities, the Hong Kong Disneyland Resort has released a new 20th anniversary celebration compilation soundtrack featuring various artists performing songs associated with the resort. I'm not sure of any of these, to be fair. I've never been to Hong Kong Disney, but selections include Nina Ann Nelson performing The Most Magical Party of All, Paris Carney performing You Belong, Heloise and Tony Ferrari performing The Beauty of Friendship, Dwayne Whitmore and Raquel Trinidad performing Friends Forever, Grayson DeWolf performing What Friends Do, Calzone performing I Got You, and Maha Christina performing Count on You. The new soundtrack is available streaming right now on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube Music, and wherever else you stream your music. And finally, Mark Hoppus from Blink-182 has written the theme song for Disney Junior's new Marvel's Iron Man and His Awesome Friends. The song, Totally Awesome, is, as you would expect, an upbeat pop-punk song, and you can check it out online, and here's just a little taste of it as well.
Armor up! It's a new day, Tony, get your boots on. Riri, you're the greatest Amadeus. Armor up! We're the coolest team ever, save the world together. Suits up, mask down. Heroes will have fun. Let's go! It's totally awesome, and I'm with my best friends. It's better than chocolate, it's better than weekends. We're up in the skyline, we're following our hearts. We're having a great time, nobody can stop us. We're
So, just another fun fact, this is the second song for Disney Junior written by a pop-punk superstar. Patrick Stump, a Fall Out Boy, wrote the theme song for Marvel's Spidey and His Amazing Friends. So, fun and musical fact for you. And that is Disney Music News for this week. Well, that's it for this episode of the Music Behind the Magic podcast. Thanks again to Shaun Jex for joining us, and thank you all for listening and being a part of this community. This upcoming weekend here in the U.S. is July 4th, so I hope everyone here has a great long weekend, and would just ask you to take a few minutes away from the awesome food and fireworks, and by the way, be careful and be safe out there, and reflect on the amazing history of our country. I know things sometimes seem tense these days, and that's probably putting it lightly, but I like to believe that as Americans, there's more we have in common that would drive us apart, and the common values and history that we share is a pretty powerful unifier. And I know I probably sound a little bit idealistic and maybe a little bit naive, but I have hope and faith in this country, and I hope that our listeners, both in the US as well as all of you globally that listen, has some faith left in us too. Hey, look, this is the country that gave us Disney, and that's at least one thing that unifies us. So, sorry for the sappy monologue, but I hope all my fellow citizens have a great 4th, and that everyone has a magical musical day. See you soon.